Good morning. The Chancellor Rishi Sunak will hail a new age of optimism when he delivers his much-trailed budget this lunchtime. He's expected to say he has more to spend as the country's rebounded better than expected from the pandemic. But critics don't share his vision for a stronger economy, fearing many will be left just worse off. Our deputy political editor, Sam Coates, reports.
These are the pictures the Chancellor wants you to see of someone keeping a tight rein on budgets rather than delivering a sugar rush to the economy. Today, Rishi Sunak will say there are limits to what he can afford, new fiscal rules on the financial help he can offer. But in Leicester, where over a third of people live in the most financially deprived pockets of the country, the demands on the Chancellor are limitless. What do you want out of them? What do you want from the government?
I want better education and better health service.
I think they could spend more on education because I'm a PGCE teacher, I'm a training teacher, so I think that it would definitely be beneficial to put more money into the education department.
I think public transport would be a really good area to spend more on.
Later on, Rishi Sunak will deliver his priorities in a speech to the House of Commons. He will say, today's budget begins the work of preparing for a new economy post-COVID, an economy of higher wages, higher skills and rising productivity, of strong public services, vibrant communities and safer streets. An economy fit for an age of optimism. That is the stronger economy of the future. Stronger for the future, but it can't be strong everywhere. Levelling up can't be universal.
Levelling up. Boris Johnson's promise turning into Rishi Sunak's nightmare. Whether it's funding for skills, money for farmers, or dealing with high energy bills, every single cabinet minister now says their pet demand is part of levelling up. But Rishi Sunak can't afford it all.
Business groups accept that premise.
Every region's going to ask for money for skills training, for incentives, to support prosperity. And once you multiply that by the different areas of the United Kingdom, there's just simply not enough money for that.
It wasn't me who invented the phrase levelling up and made it a central part of the government's agenda. And there is a lot that can be done to better balance the regions of the UK. And this time around, let's have something that means something, that's properly defined, and that all regions, including the Midlands, including the East Midlands, get a fair crack at that.
This isn't an austerity budget, but nor is there money for tax cuts.
The same things that have driven up tax and spend this year, in particular, the need to spend on health and social care, driven in part by an ageing population, those things aren't going to go away. And my guess is that over the next decade, whatever might happen over the next 2 or 3 years, the overall level of taxation will probably continue to rise.
The Chancellor will have more money to play with than many expected, but he wants to be remembered as prudent. Not everyone can win. Sam Coates, Sky News, in Leicester.
Well, let's speak to the former Treasury Minister and former Housing Secretary, Robert Jenrick. Mr Jenrick, always great to see you. Thanks for joining us on this budget day. Who's going to be better off today?
Well, look, I think there's an uncertain picture across the world with inflation, with shortages and issues that the Chancellor will have to contend with. But as your report just said, there are reasons for optimism. Unemployment in particular is much lower than people expected, and the British economy is growing. It's going to be the fastest growing of any G7 economy. So I think that does give the Chancellor some room for two things, really. Firstly, for some more investment in public services to tackle the cost of living and a proper plan to grow the economy as we move forwards. But he's going to have to balance that with the need to be fiscally responsible because of that continued uncertainty. And I think that's the backdrop which the Chancellor has been considering in the weeks that have preceded the budget.
So who's going to be better off today?
Well, I think we're all going to be better off in the sense that it looks like the OBR forecasts are going to show that the economy has grown substantially. Therefore, we're borrowing much less money as a country, and that gives some more room for the Chancellor to invest in the future of public services, which we all depend on, like the NHS. But I think he's also going to have to think carefully about those people on the most modest incomes and how he can help them to weather what's undoubtedly still going to be a difficult period when we're seeing inflation rising, higher energy prices and so on. You've seen that in some of the announcements that have already been made, like the decision to increase the national living wage, which is going to lead to an increase in wages for about 2 million people across the country, and the decision to move to a more normal period for public sector workers as well, so that there won't be a freeze there, but the pay review bodies will be deciding in the months to come what's a sensible and affordable increase in wages for that 6 million people right across the country. So I think it's striking that balance, along with, as I say, continuing to be fiscally prudent, because we just don't know what the future holds, and inflation means the risk of interest rate rises, and that's very costly to the British economy and to the Chancellor's books.
Sure. Given that we're all going to be better off, public sector workers are going to get an above-inflation pay rise.
Well, we don't know and we can't say that yet, can we? To be fair to the Chancellor,
if you say everybody's going to be better off, it's got to be higher than inflation, hasn't it?
Well, the way that public sector pay is set in this country is by pay review bodies who then advise the relevant government department through a proper process. And those are independent bodies that include trade unionists, business people, experts. And so I think what the Chancellor is going to say is that we're able, as a result of the growing economy, to move into a more normal period. That means that he's going to be asking those pay review bodies to come forward with their proposals, and then he'll consider those, or the relevant government departments will consider them next year. So I don't think he'll be in the position to say exactly what you would like him to say just yet, but that's going to be a few months off, so people will just have to wait a bit longer. But I think as a result of the way that the economy has been managed over the last year...
Just let me say, and you can, of course, override those pay review bodies, as we all know, if that's what you choose to do, either more in favour of the workers or less, as indeed we saw last year. Unless it is above inflation pay rise, you said everybody's going to be better off. Unless it's an above inflation pay rise, then we're not all going to be better off, are we?
Well, I said that I think there'll be good news across the board for the economy and for members of the public, because we'll be able to invest more in public services and be more fiscally prudent, so that we've got some protection built into the economy should there be shocks down the line. I think it is good news, given the cost of living challenge that we have right now, that we are going to be able to increase wages, either through the national living wage going up, and that's a very significant development, probably the most significant one, because that's going to lead to the people who are on the lowest wages, many of whom are within the public sector, like care workers, for example, but others across the board. Those people are going to be seeing a pay rise of around 6.5%. That's a very significant increase and really welcome, given what's happening for the cost of living.
But you did say we were all going to be better off. That's what you said.
I think we're all just going to have to wait and see what the pay review bodies report back, and there'd be no point circumventing that process, given that it's been set up in that way.
Why is the gender pay gap still at 7.9%, according to the ONS Office for National Statistics? I mean, that has been illegal since 1970. It's increased during the pandemic. Why is this government still condoning men being paid more than women?
Well, the government doesn't condone men being paid more than women.
It's against the law. What are you doing about it?
It's been against the law for a very long time, and we've been bearing down upon it. There are structural issues within the economy about the different types of jobs that sometimes men and women do, but we as a government have been trying to tackle this for a long time. It is coming down. It has been coming down over the course of the last 10 years, but it's still unacceptably high.
It's gone up over the last year. It's gone up. It's gone up over the last year. It's increased to 7.9%.
Well, that may be the case over the last year, but the longer-term trend is downwards. But I'm not here to defend that. Absolutely not. It's completely wrong. We want to see more women in the workplace, and those women being properly rewarded for the work that they do. And it's for employers to make sure that they're doing that.
Yeah, but it's also against the law, and it has been for 50 years, so you would have hoped that perhaps it would have gone by now. But let's wait and see. Test and Trace has been described by the PM as world-beating. A parliamentary investigation says it's an eye-watering waste of taxpayers' money. Which is it?
Well, I've seen the reporting on the Public Accounts Committee's work this morning, and that's something I'm certainly going to read. It is very concerning what they've said. On the other hand, it is a programme that I think has led to 320 million tests being done over the course of the last year and a bit. 20 million people have been contacted. So it has played an important part in tackling the pandemic. Are there lessons that can and must be learned from it? I think absolutely, and we're all going to have to pay heed, particularly the government, to what's said by the Public Accounts Committee. OK, slightly running out of time, so I can't press you further on that. But what I can ask you about is our most important diplomat, Her Majesty. She is not going to be at COP26. The PM said to a group of kids in Downing Street, it's touch and go if COP26 will be a success. And he is very worried about it. Given that Her Majesty is now also not going, how much do you think it's going to be a success or a failure? What's the likelihood? Well, firstly, like you, I've sent my best wishes to Her Majesty the Queen. I know she would have liked to have been at COP, and she's going to be doing a video message. It's much more important that she puts her own health and well-being first. But as regards COP, well, I think there is a lot more work to be done. I've seen Alex Sharma has been meeting Chinese representatives in the last 24 hours. We need to ensure that those countries who are the biggest global emitters come to the table, and there will be a lot of last-minute wrangling and negotiation to be done. I don't think the Prime Minister or indeed Alex Sharma could have done more than they have in terms of trying to corral global nations to take action. And there has been some significant progress in the last couple of days. And I think, for example, Scott Morrison in Australia making a significant step, to some extent Saudi Arabia, although it's to a slower trajectory than we would have wanted. But you can see progress, but a lot more now needs to be achieved just in a couple of days. OK. Finally, before I let you go, why are masks mandatory for all staff in the House of Commons, contractors, press and third parties, but not for MPs? I don't know is the honest answer to that, Kay. I mean, that's a decision, I think, by the House authorities or the Speaker who issued those guidelines. It doesn't seem right to me that there's one rule for everyone else who works in the building, but not for members of Parliament. So I think we will have to change our behaviour accordingly. I wore a mask when I was voting last night through the PAC division lobbies. I think we'll all have to consider wearing a mask in the coming days. And will you wear one for the budget? I think I will, yeah, because it will be a busy occasion, lots of people tightly packed. I don't think that as members of Parliament we can ask something different of our staff and the people who work in the building than we're doing ourselves. Mr Jenrick, I'm so sorry I can't talk to you in person. It's always much more fun doing that. Forgive me for interrupting you on occasion. It's always a little bit tricky, isn't it, when it's down the line. It's a pleasure talking to you. We'll see you very soon, hopefully. Thank you. Nice to see you. Bye now. Bye-bye. And a reminder, we'll have special live coverage of the budget here on Sky News and Sky News Online throughout the day. Meantime, still to come on the programme for you, we'll speak to the former Labour Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell for his views ahead of Chancellor Rishi Sunak's budget. 7:40, joined by royal biographer Angela Levin to talk about the Queen's absence from the COP26. Sorry about that. We should have had a picture of the Queen there. We'll have one next time, I promise. And the Chancellor may be feeling positive about his post-COVID economy, but not everyone is. We'll discuss the budget fears for those on universal credit at 7:45. Coronavirus is said to have widened the divisions between the richest and the poorest in society, and opponents fear that this budget will do little to help those struggling to get by. Fraser Maud joins us now from Manchester, where he's at a food bank this morning. Hi, Fraser. More and more needed, the food banks up and down the country.
Absolutely, yeah, and they're having more and more trouble getting hold of the food that they need to distribute. Here at this food bank run by Rainbow Surprise in Crumpsall in North Manchester, we can see it looks as though they do have some stock in here at the moment. It's a fantastic community project, this. It's a community shop as well as being a food bank. There's a children's play group as well where free meals will be given out later on today, and there are other community projects here as well. The chair is Shaka Hussain. Just how tough is it at the moment? And are you seeing more and more people coming in and having to use the food bank facility? facilities?
Yes, again, for the last 4 weeks, we've seen a dramatic increase on the families that are being referred, whether they're self-referring themselves or through the councils or through professionals like social workers and GPs. However, we've seen a lot of increase in the self-referral because the families have, with this loss of the universal credit, £20 that was temporarily out, that's making a big difference and an impact. And it's not just the people on benefits, it's people who are working class as well that are really finding it difficult at the moment.
Have you noticed a rise in the number of people because of the increase in fuel costs so far? Have they started to bite yet?
That has definitely had a part to play in it. I mean, everything makes a big difference, even if it's a few pennies increase these days, because what we've gone through in the last 2 years, everybody in this country, everybody's seen such a massive difference in the finances, and they have to, it's penny pinching.
Just one last thing. What would you like to hear from the Chancellor today to help the people who have to come in here?
Yeah, well, I would like to see a lot of difference made towards the working class and helping people towards the benefits as well, doing something that's going to make their life easier and let them get back on track so they're not depending on people like ourselves and the food banks, and they can make their own life better.
OK, Shaka, thanks very much for talking to us today. Another issue that they're having here is actually getting the supplies in. There are shortages on the shelves of the supermarkets. That means that there are shortages of any excess food that can be donated to places like this. So it's building into a bit of a perfect storm for the food banks.
OK, Fergus, thank you. Concerns the Queen's absence from the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow next week might persuade some world leaders to stay at home. The Queen has pulled out on medical advice to rest and will deliver a recorded address to the delegates instead. So what is going on? Our royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills is with us now. Hello to you, Rhiannon. Is she poorly?
So this is a decision that will not have been taken lightly. Literally for weeks, we've been talking about the fact that the Queen was going to host this reception, and it's been widely wanted to be known that she'd be there to welcome the world leaders. So her pulling out really, I think, has come down to doctors' orders. I think they have decided that that long journey from Windsor to Glasgow was simply too much. Now, inevitably, it is going to cause concern. This is now the second big engagement that she's pulled out of in a week, and that is incredibly rare during her reign. But she is 95 years old. October has been an incredibly busy month. One thing she's been doing throughout October is talking about COP. So I think that shows just how much she wanted to go. It has made me think about Prince Philip when he was in his mid-90s. He was able to retire from public life, to step back because he was fed up of all those questions about his health. For the Queen, though, that simply is not an option because she wants to be seen to be so heavily involved still in all of those constitutional duties. The palace stock phrase at the moment is that she is in good spirits, that she's still carrying out those light duties, and they would have been really keen to get those pictures out yesterday of her welcoming 2 new ambassadors to the UK. Also, as you mentioned there, she is still going to record a message that will be played at that reception, where we understand she's going to stress how she wants to see meaningful actions take place at the climate summit. Other members of the family, of course, are also going to go, but there's no doubt her influence is going to be missed. And we also understand that the Queen herself is very keen that other world leaders do not just use her absence as an excuse not to turn up.
OK, thank you. What's thought to be the final image of the camera operator Halyna Hutchins on the set of the film Rust has been shared on social media. It shows her standing in front of Alec Baldwin before the actor accidentally shot and killed her. The district attorney is reported to have said the firearm used was a legitimate gun and not a prop. Our US correspondent Greg Milam is in Santa Fe in New Mexico.
Well, we will hear from the sheriff and the district attorney here later today in their first news conference, actually, since that incident happened last Thursday. We have had quite a lot of information from the police by way of an affidavit that they filed to a judge to get a search warrant containing a lot of information from those who were there on set describing what happened, describing Alec Baldwin, as it was described, cross-drawing his weapon to point it towards the camera during a rehearsal, and it was then that weapon was discharged, and we know the cinematographer Halyna Hutchins was shot and killed. In fact, what's purported to be the last image of her on set has been released by someone who was working on that film. We know also from the district attorney who last week said that it was hard to say whether there would be any criminal charges as a result of that incident, has now told the New York Times that everything is on the table, including criminal charges. She said that the focus is on the ballistic evidence, trying to establish what it was, the projectile that was in that weapon and how it got there. She said an enormous amount of ammunition had been recovered from the scene, not clear what type of ammunition that was. And she also said that this idea that it was a prop gun, which it was, somehow mischaracterises the weapon involved. It was a real gun, as most prop guns are, an antique era weapon, as she described it, but a real gun. She also said it would be weeks, possibly months, before any decision would be reached on whether anyone would be charged as a result of what happened. So there are all these questions, suggestions that maybe these weapons were used for target practice during breaks in filming, and a real quest for answers coming, of course, around the investigation, but also from the wider entertainment industry. But this investigation, it's clear, will take some time.
Returning now to our top story, and today is not just a budget but also a spending review when the Chancellor announces which departments get what in terms of cash. Our economics and data editor, that's Ed Conway, of course, has been looking at how much the Chancellor has to spend.
Can it be that time of year again? Yes, it is budget time. And indeed, this time we get the spending review as well. I'm going to tell you the things to look out for. There are three of them, three headlines here. First of all, we get new economic forecasts. And perhaps most important of all, though inflation is really important this time around as well, is gross domestic product. So the size of the economy. And you can see just over the course of the last few years, the financial crisis, there, a bit of a dip there, it went up, up, up. And around 2020, early 2020, the expectation was it was going to go even higher, that dotted line there. But of course, we all know what happened next, don't we? Look, a massive fall when COVID hit, lockdowns hit, and it went down there. Last time the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, looked at this, it thought we were going to have a bit of a dip and that red line, it would go higher and higher in the next few years. But what we do know is actually things have come in a bit better than expected. Look at that white line, a bit steeper in the recovery. So we might get an upgrade on economic growth. So that's good news for us and indeed for the Chancellor. Also, second thing, taxes. We get new tax policy potentially, but there's been an awful lot happening this year already. This is showing you the tax burden, so just the total amount of tax as a percentage of national income in the UK, and it goes all the way back to 1955. But have a look at this. With those national insurance increases, with corporation tax increases, we got all of that this year, massive tax increases. As a result of that, the dotted line doesn't look like it's that high, does it? But actually, that's now at the highest sustained level ever. So we'll get new tax policy from the Chancellor, and the question is whether it moves that needle. Finally, and this is unusual, we get a spending review, a 3-year spending review. The government's setting out what it's spending. There have been so many numbers on this recently, haven't there? So many press releases, so many announcements. Let's just focus on what's actually going on here. The government spends about just over £1 trillion in total, but you can break that down. You can break it down in two ways: annually managed expenditure and departmental spending, the blue stuff and the red stuff. The blue stuff, annually managed expenditure, that's the stuff the government doesn't really control on an annual basis, stuff like debt interest, welfare, pensions, things like that. What we're really focused on here is the red stuff, departmental spending, what it's spending on day-to-day spending and investment in all of those different departments. So let's take those two bars and focus on them in particular. Look, you can see this is much higher, day-to-day spending. Then you've got capital, that's all the spending on investments on big projects. We know they're going to go a bit higher in this spending review, so up to 441, 113. But the interesting thing is if we take this in particular, day-to-day spending, move it across here, what we're really focusing on here, what really matters when you pull away everything else, is the extra bit. £56 billion of extra spending. And we already know some of that's going to the NHS, about £14 billion. We had that earlier on this year. We know some is likely to go to schools and aid, maybe about £6 billion, which leaves roughly £36 billion. That really is what this spending review is about. Who is going to get that money? How is the economy going to do? What's going to happen to taxes? All sorts of things that are going to be decided in this budget and spending review. It could be a very big day.
£36 billion. Isn't that how much the test and trace scheme cost? Asking for a friend. More of the day's news for you now. Prince Andrew's lawyer has asked a New York judge not to reveal the details of a private document which he believes will protect the prince in his upcoming lawsuit. He's facing claims that he assaulted Virginia Giuffre when she was just 17, which he denies. His lawyer believes the document will release him from any liability, and he intends to use them to try to get the lawsuit dismissed. Gloucestershire Police has been graded as inadequate in half of its 10 key performance indicators, including safeguarding vulnerable victims. A recent inspection found domestic abuse crimes were of particular concern. The force says it accepts there's much work still to be done. More than 80,000 children aged between 12 and 15 have been booked in online to receive their COVID-19 vaccinations. 2.5 million letters have now been sent out inviting parents to book a jab for their child this half-term through the National Booking Service. Looking at the weather for you, next few days looking mild and windy with rain in parts of the north and west, bringing the risk of local flooding. At least 2 people have died in strong storms battering the Italian island of Sicily. Powerful storm hit the island yesterday, causing widespread flooding around the city of Catania. The mayor has urged residents to stay indoors for safety reasons, following a surge in requests for help reaching local authorities. Meteorologists in Italy expect the storm to peak between now and Friday. Coming up, the former Labour shadow Chancellor John McDonnell gives us his views ahead of the budget. That to come.
They say they can't go back to Myanmar yet. If they do, they fear they'll be killed. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world. If there is a bigger explosion, this area would be in the danger zone.
These traffic jams snake for hours up and down this hillside. It means precious aid can't access those in need.
You can see the depth of the water. If you have a look in front of us, there are people wading through it.
I think experiencing the 2 million person march in Hong Kong, that was a moment.
I don't like the Chinese government. It's cruel.
It was real people power in action.
Police have been firing tear gas and rubber bullets.
See fires all around us here, and just one of them is the size of around 31,000 football pitches.
Siobhan Robbins, Sky News, Bangkok. The former Treasury Minister, Robert Jenrick, says the Chancellor will have to help those on low incomes through the winter in today's budget. Rishi Sunak is believed to have more to spend as the country's rebounded better than expected from the pandemic. But Mr Jenrick wants help for everybody.
Well, I think we're all going to be better off in the sense that It looks like the OBR forecasts are going to show that the economy has grown substantially, therefore we're borrowing much less money as a country, and that gives some more room for the Chancellor to invest in the future of public services, which we all depend on, like the NHS. But I think he's also going to have to think carefully about those people on the most modest incomes and how he can help them to weather what's undoubtedly still going to be a difficult period when we're seeing inflation rising, higher energy prices and so on.
He went on to say that we're all going to be better off as a result, tomorrow's here, as a result of the budget, but didn't explain how.
That's right. The Chancellor's challenge was set out there by Robert Jenrick. He's trying to ride two horses here, essentially. He's trying to say there's some economic good news. As Mr Jenrick said, the forecasts are looking a lot better. That's tens of billions of pounds extra to play with. And what he's saying is that a lot of that is going to go into public services. We've heard many of the announcements already, billions of pounds for the NHS and a pay increase on the minimum wage and for the public sector coming in next year. So lots of economic good news, the Chancellor will say. He'll say we're going to the post-COVID age. He certainly hopes so. But then he's also trying to appear fiscally prudent. As the Chancellor, who was the face of the furlough scheme and all the COVID schemes to help people get through the pandemic, he's now trying to reinvent himself as the Chancellor who's controlling the public finances. And that's a difficult message because on something like universal credit, he's saying we just don't have the money to carry on giving people that extra £20 a week. And what will be causing jitters for many Tory MPs in marginal seats is, are people going to feel the impact of this good news in the coming months? Because those pay rises, whatever they turn out to be, won't be clear until next April. We've also got, of course, the spectre of rising inflation, which is going to make things in the shops, going to make fuel bills much more expensive. And so if people aren't seen over the coming months to feel any better off, or indeed feel a lot worse off, then this won't be seen as a great success.
Yeah, I did ask him about pay for men and women still not being on level playing fields. Couldn't really say that much about that, but I was interested to hear what he said about masks.
That's right. Yesterday, new guidance was issued about masks so that everyone in Parliament, that's all staff, have to wear masks indoors, which hasn't been happening that consistently. But the House of Commons can't tell MPs what to do on that. They're responsible for themselves. And it was interesting to hear Robert Jenrick saying that he will be wearing a mask in the packed chamber today, and it's time for MPs, he said, to change their behaviour. So we've traditionally seen a lot more masks on the Labour benches than the Tory ones. I wonder if we will be seeing more Tories wearing masks today in the light of rising case numbers and the idea that they need to be setting an example to the public.
Indeed, so in fact went further, didn't he, and said that the rules should change, so it's the same for everybody.
Yeah.
You're hightailing it to Downing Street?
I will see you there.
OK, looking forward to it. Thanks very much indeed. In the meantime, let's bring in the former Labour Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell, who is joining us now. What does a former Labour Shadow Chancellor do when it's budget day these days?
Appear on Burley in the morning, I suppose. Well, comment basically about the budget itself, what's in it and what should be in it, and provided advice as much as possible, but also to work with those who are campaigning on some of the issues where more money needs to be spent and the issues that the Chancellor should be addressing.
OK, are you disappointed that your party is only calling for £10 an hour minimum wage? The Tories have pledged that they'll get to that by the next election anyway.
Well, what's interesting, if we'd have been elected, if you remember, Kay, you interviewed me at the time, if we'd have been elected in 2019, that £10 an hour would have been in place by the following April. And because it hasn't been, people have lost out on £2,500 a year. So I think what we need is but we should have had £10 an hour in place anyway, and then we should work towards something higher. People have argued, and people are negotiating now around £15 an hour. I think we should give that commitment that by the next election, that's what we should be moving to, because people out there are suffering. You know, the Chancellor has put out this slogan today about optimism. Well, I don't think people who have just had their universal credit cut are going to feel particularly optimistic with inflation rising, energy prices rising. And, you know, even that announcement on lifting the pay freeze was spoilt when they said, well, actually, we're lifting the pay freeze, but you're not guaranteed that you'll get even a pay rise in line with inflation, or that will provide the money to those local authorities or public services to pay for the pay freeze. So this idea that suddenly you can bring about optimism when you're disappointing so many people, I think is going to come back, and the Chancellor is going to have to think again. I'm hoping today, one example, I'm hoping today he reverses universal credit cut, but also he guarantees public sector workers a real pay rise, so above the rate of inflation.
You know neither of those are going to happen, though, former Shadow Chancellor, don't you? Because I did put that to one of his ministers yesterday, and he basically said that's not going to happen, at least for now. They would also say that they need to wait for the pay review bodies to give them guidance as to how much public sector pay workers should get. Go on.
I think he's under a lot of pressure on the universal credit issue. So I wouldn't be surprised if there is some movement there, maybe around, the taper, how much you take away from people. And I think the build-up on, if he doesn't do something on pay today, I think he's going to have to be forced into it in the coming months. If you look at what's happening from the trade union movement at the moment, they're basically, a number of the trade unions are now balloting their members for industrial action. Why? Not because they want to strike or dispute, it's because their members are saying we can't live off the wages that we now have. They've been frozen for over a decade. The TUC figures yesterday revealed that actually there's a 0% rise, a freeze in pay since 2011. So people just literally can't get by. And I think he's going to have to shift on pay at some stage.
But you know as well as I do, former Shadow Chancellor, that he's come up with an extra more than £500 million for those who sadly are no longer getting that £20 uplift on universal credit. But if they do need more money, he's found £500 million to help those people.
Well, he should come out now today and say, I'm not going ahead with universal credit. The OBR figures mean we've got a little bit more to play with. Why don't we actually spend that on the most needy? If he did that, I think he'd be welcomed on all sides of the House, including large numbers of his own Conservative MPs who are reporting back to him from their constituencies, some of them new MPs in those supposed red wall seats, saying people can't live off what they have at the moment. And there's real poverty and suffering out there. Don't hit the poorest when you're making these sorts of cuts. And so I think the pressure will be upon him to move in some form. We might see something today, but if not, I think we'll see it eventually.
OK, former Shadow Chancellor, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Good to see you.
You too. Now, the Queen's not going to the COP26 climate change conference, and there are concerns that may put off other world leaders from attending. Joining us is journalist and royal biographer Angela Levin. Hello to you, Angela. It's always great to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. You know, she is our best-known leading diplomat. If she's not there, what impact will it have on a conference like COP, where, a lot of people do come to glad hand with the Queen?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, fortunately, she is going to pre-record comments which will be heard over there. And the way she does this is absolutely brilliant, isn't it? She always wins people round. Millions want to listen to what she says. She's so succinct and common sense. And I think that is some sort of small compensation. But otherwise, I think people would be very disappointed because, as you're showing now on the screen, that people came from all around last week to just see her smile and look where they're looking at her with a grin because they just think she's the most extraordinary woman. And she is. She's probably one of the most popular in the world and makes the British monarchy accessible to people who just think she's terrific.
Do you think it's just precautionary? I suppose some people more concerned because the palace chose to keep secret that she spent a night in hospital. A couple of events now being cancelled.
Yes, I think two things. I think the journey back and forth to Glasgow and to then work very hard and go around glad handing everybody is very tiring. You've got to be in good condition and at the top of your, as much as you can, really. And I think it could possibly be just too much for her. I think perhaps she recognised yesterday that even doing meeting the ambassador of Switzerland and the ambassador of Korea was really quite a lot. And I think she's being very sensible. The other thing is, which is very important, is that elderly people don't recover from even tiredness or any sort of ill health quickly. Young people can push it off because the antibodies are up and lively and fighting. But I think when you're much older, we have to keep saying to ourselves, she is 95, that it takes much longer to overcome fatigue and for the body to be back up to, reasonable behaviour. And I think that counts as well. And she doesn't want to undermine what she's done, which is not take the dogs out for a week for a walk, which is very rare for her, and to build up her strength slowly and gradually so that she can come back and do lighter things and not so many of them for us.
Yeah, she must be very tired if she's not taking the dogs out. I mean, her raison d'etre on many occasions in the past, as we know. Is this, though, looking forward, is this will we see this as a watershed moment for the royal family? The others, like Charles and Camilla and William and Kate, they seem to be circling the wagons now.
Yes, I think it is. Sometimes these small things, and I think it was her having a walking stick. It seems quite a small thing. You can say so what, because it was cobblestones to get to Westminster Abbey. But actually, I think these are very significant and things can change enormously. I think people are not going to put pressure on her to do as many engagements as she would like. I think they will ease right off, as so they should. And she's also not going to go anywhere without one of the senior royals being with her. So if she doesn't feel very well, somebody can do it. She doesn't have to let people down. And I think this will make her feel more relaxed and will work very well. What's very nice is we hear so much criticism of the royal family, how they're not friendly and they fight and they don't like each other. But here we see them actually being like any good family should be, come up to it, help out your mother or your grandmother, because although she's a superwoman, she's not going to be a superwoman forever. And this will help her continue and feel secure and loved by her family, which I think is a wonderful thing for her.
Yeah, good to see you as always, Angela. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
NHS Test and Trace programme failed to stop the spread of COVID-19 despite being handed eye-watering sums of money, despite being given £37 billion. A new report by MPs says it failed in its aim to give people a return to a more normal way of life. Here's Milena Veselinovic with more.
It was one of the most expensive health programmes of the pandemic, with a budget of £37 billion over 2 years. But according to a new report by the Public Accounts Committee, NHS Test and Trace failed in its core task.
Test and Trace promised boldly that it would be the vehicle for preventing future lockdowns. On that, it failed palpably because there were 2 further lockdowns. But ultimately, Test and Trace has cost a lot, said it would deliver things, it didn't deliver on those things, so in its own terms, it failed.
The report says the system struggled to deliver tests when under pressure and called it muddled, overstated and eye-wateringly expensive.
The committee criticised the use of contractors who were paid on average more than £1,000 a day. And this, the report says, is likely to have cost taxpayers hundreds of millions of pounds.
Some test centre workers say their sites were mismanaged.
When I started there, the site was open 12 hours a day. Then, as we went further down, the company or whomever decided that it would have to be 14 hours a day, which by the nature of the employment contracts and the way the NHS employs their staff's working time directives, etc., they would have to have 2 teams. They would then have to have those 2 teams overlapping, which meant that we basically had twice as many staff as was necessary to run the site.
In a statement, the Department of Health and Social Care said, to date, over 323 million tests have been delivered and almost 20 million people contacted who could otherwise have unknowingly transmitted the virus. We have rightly drawn on the extensive expertise of a number of public and private sector partners who have been invaluable in helping us tackle the virus. But some scientists think contact tracing failed because isolation wasn't properly supported.
We knew for this system to be successful, it had to meet certain criteria.
in that we had to identify a high percentage of the contacts, probably over 75%, and we had to get them to isolate really within about 48 hours of their contact. And it became very apparent over the summer and the autumn last year that we weren't getting anywhere near that number of cases to isolate.
A huge amount of money spent, but this report says there isn't much to show for it. Milena Veselinovic, Sky News.
Coming up, why not everyone's feeling optimistic about the budget. Coming up, we'll discuss the concerns for those on universal credit.
Climate Live started in spring 2019 after I'd been organising the youth climate strikes for a while and realised that obviously they've been incredible at mobilising young people for climate action, but there's also a lot of young people that aren't engaged. So I thought music would be a really good way to engage them. So started kind of messaging people within our international Fridays for Future network saying, hey, shall we do concerts? What do people think about this? People said yes. And then that's how Climate Live was born. As you mentioned, we recently held our events in over 20 countries. Our aim is to engage a new audience in the climate movement by harnessing the power of music. Once they're there, educate them, especially focusing on the challenges faced by those on the front lines of the climate crisis, something that's really easy to forget. We've had, amazing artists all over the world, from Colombia to Brazil to the Philippines, and as well as artists, there's been speakers. So it's kind of combining that and, getting people's favorite artists there. And then once people are there because of the artist, they then listen to the speakers and hear about the messaging and join the movement at such a crucial time right before the COP26 conference. It's aimed at world leaders. So we've been, young people for the past 2-3 years have been taking to the streets and saying, listen to the science. This is a climate crisis. This is happening. There are people on the front lines being affected right now and nothing's being done. There's lots of empty promises. There's lots of, 2030, 2050, when actually, according to the science, that's far too late. And yeah, we're just saying we are the youth. This is our future and our present, and you're not listening. So we're making a bit more noise ahead of the conference and saying, listen to us, listen to the science. Can you hear us yet? I think it's really good for people to see that the youth climate movement isn't all serious. We're not, super intense all the time. We do have fun. We are young people at the end of the day. And yeah, other young people should join us because it's not all serious, it's not all speeches, it's not all meetings. We do actually have fun and dance around.
Did you know that if we all work together, we can really make a difference to the air pollution around our schools?
Yeah, we should really do that.
Wednesday will start mild, windy and dry for many, but Ireland, Northern Ireland, Southern Scotland and Cumbria will see rain, heavy on the hills. There'll be little change through the morning, but western parts of Ireland should dry up. The best of the sunshine will be across northern Scotland. It'll stay very mild and windy. During the afternoon, the rain will largely clear into northwest England and northwest Wales. The unsettled conditions mean air pollution levels are expected to remain low, with the levels between 1 and 3 on the Daily Air Quality Index.
The Air Quality Report, sponsored by Philips Air Purifiers.
Going to be hearing from the Chancellor Budget Day today. After Prime Minister's questions, he's expected to speak of a new age of optimism. But not everyone is feeling quite so hopeful, I suppose. Let's find out, should we? Rebecca is with us. She is a single mum on universal credit. Hello to you, Rebecca. Thanks for joining us. I was speaking to a government minister or former minister earlier on in this hour, and he said everybody's going to be better off after the budget. Do you feel that you will be?
No, I'm quite worried about it. I mean, obviously, I've seen bits and pieces that say maybe there's going to be a pay increase to like £9.50, and my first thought about per hour, and my first thought about that was, you know, yay, that's only 50 pence less than what most people say is a sensible living wage of £10. And then I heard you before talking to someone and they mentioned the taper rate. That's a really big concern because, you know, all the money that I earn, anything over £290 a month, that's going to be taken back at the rate of 63p to every pound. So I'm a bit concerned. It seems to me like it's the classic, the government has taken away a huge thing, like a huge support, and now they're trying to give back a little bit and pretend that it's a lot.
Yeah, but the government would say in response to that, we never were planning to give you that £20 forever. It was only to get you over the pandemic.
Yes, and I value that. I value that at the very beginning they said we're only going to make this temporary. But I guess my response to that would be if you put in place a temporary measure and see that it makes a humongous difference to thousands and millions of vulnerable families across the country, would you not consider that perhaps you should continue with it or put something in place that's even better? Because obviously that was sorely needed, which that £20 was sorely needed.
But who should pay for that, Rebecca?
That I'm not too sure because I don't understand how. I'm not Rishi Sunak. That's sort of his job. But I think that the sensible way to do it would be to find some way, maybe of taxing the more wealthy instead of penalising the poorer. But I can't give you a sensible answer on that because I'm not Rishi Sunak. I can't juggle the country's finances.
Yeah, indeed. So apparently it would cost something like £6 billion to keep that in place. I suppose what you're saying in response to that is it will cost more than that for so many people who are going to be struggling on the breadline as a result of not having that money. So the psychological impact on people who can't put food on the table is worth $6 billion?
Yeah, exactly that. You know, you've got to think of the psychological issues, the health issues. You know, that means that millions of people are going to have to be eating poorer, sort of more processed food or you know, like just poorer quality food. So then that their health is declining. And then it's things like other associated health things. So, you know, example, just catching the bus places costs quite a chunk of money, and so then maybe more walking, which is good, but also that's cold and wet. So I you know, I don't know if it's making sense, but I think giving people support and benefit so that they can buy healthier food, so that they can heat their house, so they can afford the bus, is definitely worth $6 billion or more.
I understand. You're saying that that safety net needs to be in place for families like yours, Rebecca. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme this morning. Thank you. We'll be hearing from Rishi Sunak just after 12:30 today, ready to deliver his next budget. We'll have all the latest news and analysis on that in just a moment. Images of him ahead of the budget. We'll see him at number 11 with his red box a little bit later on. Stay tuned.